Hi! This video is going to be a follow-up to a video that I did about how to win as a dungeon master or game master when running a tabletop role-playing game. In that video, I also talk about how to win as a player character, but I also focused on the fears that game masters or dungeon masters could experience while running a tabletop role-playing game that could be disruptive to the session. And I also gave you some tips on how to overcome such fears. And I thought it would be a great idea to make a video about the player characters' fears, or rather the players participating as player characters. They may experience, yes, certain dreadful things that could interrupt gameplay. This is not about pathological or mental condition sort of fears like people afraid of imaginary spiders. This is not that case. This is more rooted on the mechanics and the theme of the sessions. The first one is about the player that wants to tell a story. This is quite similar to the other fear of the game master, the frustrated author or frustrated writer sort of game master. This is all about the player obsessed or too focused on telling the story of his or her player character. This is very disruptive because you are playing a collaborative game. The story has to do with other people. This is similar to the other type of game master because he or she looks at the other player characters, the game world, the non-player characters, everything as an accessory to telling his or her story. There are ways to overcome this. And like I said, this is not about pathological cases. This is about a person who is trying to enjoy a tabletop role-playing game, but sometimes, perhaps due to clumsiness or nervousness or whatever, he or she doesn't realize that the experience is ruined because of that egocentrical storytelling. I remember, I'm going to give you like a case that I don't think is salvageable. Many years back, I had a player that did everything in his power to skip or just go over the different scenes as fast as possible because they didn't have his or her character as, or his character as the focus, the center of the story, the center of the scene. So combat encounters, scenes of investigation, social interaction, where his character was not like the most important piece. He did everything in his power. He tried to kill enemies as fast as possible while endangering himself and the rest of the party members. When it comes to social situations, he kept interrupting everyone, trying to skip ahead, not letting the other members of the group try to dig for details or investigate deeper into a social conversation, trying to obtain some sort of clues about the mystery, etc. When it comes to investigation during the expeditions, he wasn't interested in obtaining clues and looking for answers. He was all about, I want to get to the next scene as fast as possible to see if I am the main character in that scene. If he had the spotlight in that scene, then he wanted to prolong the scene as much as possible. And even though we talked to him about this, he wouldn't budge, so that wasn't going to work out. He was out of the group. So in this case, let's say that it is not a pathological case as explained. This is a person that is simply not aware of the damage that is being done to the session. You should encourage that player to come up with semi-complex background stories for his character. It all depends on the game. There are some games that have a lot of mechanisms related to the character's background and such, but there are some other games that are quite simple or minimalistic when it comes to that. Just make it clear to the player that if you're playing a role-playing game where there is high character death or a high probability of the character reaching his or her demise, then just make it so that the character, the player, is comfortable with the idea of coming up with this complex background and his character could end up dying in the first or just a few encounters into the adventure. So yes, I think you can find that outlet for the player to create those stories when it comes to his background, but when it comes to the adventure itself, the player needs to know that the other players are also going to be participating, creating the story through their interactions with the game world. This is not writing a book, this is not storytelling like let's tell a story around the campfire. This is a tabletop role-playing game. The story is going to be born because of the interactions of the player characters with the game world, or the interactions with the non-player characters with the player characters, and so forth. I think this fear is based on a certain need, like a charismatic need, so to speak. The player wants to feel special, so he or she will do everything in his or her power to manipulate things so that his character is in the spotlight, he's the center of attention, and it's quite ridiculous. It's similar to those people in real life that they do everything in their power to modify their bodies. Perhaps they say something like, I'm going to put this chunk of metal here, or this tattoo over here or there, or I'm going to paint my hair in this color. But a lot of people are already doing that, so they are not looking special at all. They look like another one in the bunch. So it's the same thing. Okay, moving on from that, the next fear is about the player feeling useless. Using his or her player character as a vehicle, they experience that sense of not being useful. You could say that this is a utilitarian based fear. This is quite common to spot. You see these players that are using the abilities, the skills, and the powers of his or her player character in the most weird ways. They use them when they are not needed, and when they actually need to use something, they don't do it. They do not use the useful skill, ability, power. So they are in a constant state of tension. They want to feel useful for the rest of the party, but they are so focused on that it results in them missing their opportunity. When they actually get the chance to become useful, they miss their opportunity because they are so focused on how can I be useful to the party, and then they miss that perfect moment to use their weapons, their skills, etc. Or sometimes they're like, oh, I can't wait to use this new ability, this new power, and they do it and it wasn't necessary at all, or it disrupts something. And sometimes they also get a bit paralyzed. They don't want to interact with the game world at all because they are afraid of screwing up. I think this is mostly an ego thing. This is about the fear of failure. So it would help if there are some things to understand. You're not going to be useful in a tabletop situation, in a scene, scenario, encounter, etc. all the time. Sometimes you're going to be acting as support. There are going to be encounters heavily focused on magic. So the casters of the group are going to shine in those encounters. And when it comes to more grunty, melee-oriented sort of characters, in that moment they are going to be like the support. They are going to keep the caster, or in the case of a sci-fi game or whatever, or sci-fantasy, the psionic user will need some sort of protection. So they are going to be like the secondary characters in that particular scene. Everyone has his or her moment to shine, and it's not about having the most moments to shine in a single session. Sometimes there are encounters that focus heavily on a particular skill set, and that encounter could be crucial or vital for the completion of the scenario or the adventure. So the player needs to understand this, and just also forget about the sense of being useless, discarding the fear of failure. There could be players that are simply paralyzed. They don't want to interact with the game world because they are afraid of messing up or screwing up. So 2 tips about that. If you're going to attempt something and you think that you may end up failing, make sure that it doesn't involve the other members of the party. And if you're going to be attempting something, just keep in mind that sometimes failure can also be something helpful. If you see this monster and you are going to use this spell, or you're going to use this particular weapon against that monster, and it's useless, now the party knows that spell and that weapon doesn't work. It's about gathering information. in anything related to exploration, investigation. If you are using a skill, if you are using during a social encounter, you want to ask something to the non-player character, and the line of questioning leads nowhere. You can already scratch out or discard that line of questions. That's not the way to obtain information from that non-player character. So it always helps. And this leads us to the next fear. Just to wrap that point up, it's a fear, like I said, of being useless, of being dead weight. But even failures can serve to gather information about the current encounter. And do not stress up too much about being useful. Like I said, sometimes you become too distracted with those worries that when you actually get the chance to act, you don't act. You miss your opportunity. And because you're always looking to use that useful tool, skill, etc., sometimes you use those things when they are not necessary at all. Now moving on, and this is a bit related to that. This is the typical player of it's what my character would do. When it comes to this fear, I think this has a lot to do with frustrations and insecurities in real life. They bring those things into the game environment. That's quite pathological in my opinion. So I think the player, if he or she actually wants to improve, they definitely need to leave anything outside of the fictional reality. Just keep it out of the game. It has nothing to do with the game. So you can see that there is certain pathological root that is manifested or it becomes evident because when the player disrupts gameplay because it's what my character would do, he or she is trying to get others annoyed. So this is more like a, how would you say, a tip or a general advice on how to negate that excuse. Just because your character usually wants to do something, it doesn't mean that the character will do it. So it's not about it's what my character would do, it's what my character would want to do. Do you remember that episode in Star Trek when there is this character Q? You know, for those of you that do not know Q, he's basically like this very annoying godlike alien being. He gives useful advice, but he is always a jerk about it. And he was doing his jerky, assholish things on the deck of the ship. And you had this, I forget the name of this character, one of the members of the crew, he is a Klingon, and you know that Klingons are very violent, and they usually take things like honor very seriously, prowess in battle and all of that. So what the character would do would be try to beat the crap out of Q, right? But the character doesn't do that. He asks the captain, "Permission to clean the deck, captain," or something like. He's very angry and he wants the captain to authorize him beating up Q, which of course he wouldn't be able to do, but he still wanted to do that. It's what his character would do, but he's not doing it. There are consequences in the game world. He is not going to do it. So in the same thing applies to tabletop role-playing games. During the moment of a diplomatic negotiation, unless there is some sort of mechanic that the game master can exploit. One of those, oh, you have the character flaw of hot-blooded. If during a situation your character, because of his or her background, wants to attack someone, you need to make like a self-control or self-restraint check in order not to do so. In that case, that's a different way of handling things. But in games where you do not have that mechanic, it's not what your character would do, it's what your character would want to do. So you should roleplay that as perhaps the characters are talking to this odious or insidious non-player character, and your character wants to attack that non-player character. You could be like, my character is cracking his knuckles, or he's scowling and frowning all the time, like barely able to contain himself. You can see the vein and his forehead like almost about to burst of how angry he is. You can roleplay that. So a character that is being a player that is being a jerk would attack the character in the middle of the negotiation, ruining things. And so it's always about giving priority to the other members of the group in that character flawed sense. Like I said, it's going to be very difficult for a player to overcome this fear because he is projecting his insecurities, his frustration upon the game world. He needs to resolve things in real life before he gets back to the gaming table. Maybe he or she won't find solutions for his or her problems in real life, but he could come to an understanding that you are there to have a great time with the rest of the players. You should give them a priority when it comes to their enjoyment. When you do that, your frustration will go away. I think this applies to many things in life. If you are feeling sad or you are feeling angry and you don't find the proper time and place to unleash your wrath, try to think about how it can affect others. And there is a certain, it sounds a bit, how would you say, mushy? Or yes, like perhaps too sugary, but there is a certain love between people that overcomes many things. So if you think that sometimes you are disrupting others, that it's what my character would do, it's not what your character would do, it's what your character wants to do, but he or she is not going to do it because it would be disruptive to the game. And like I said, there are mechanics to play around with that. The game master could say something like, in one of those games with the character background acting as a flaw, the game master could require a check, or maybe you then act as your character would do. Well, thank you for watching this video. Obviously, I haven't covered all of the disruptive moments in a session. If you can think of other player-related fears, player character-related fears, please let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching my videos. Thank you for your likes and your comments. If you have any other questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that go the extra mile in supporting this channel. The information how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.